I've condemned Biden's, unnecessary and senseless war against Russia and Ukraine as a policy of national suicide. But yeah, I misjudged Russian and Soviet leaders as having overly aggressive intentions. I didn't realize the extent to which they were very sincere in their desires for peace with the West, and not just a short-term peace, but a long-term peace.
Truth to your life.
Let me first say that for most of my life, I viewed Putin as someone who is a threat to the United States, who did have plans to, if not attack and even perhaps destroy the U.S. with their Chinese ally, Russia's Chinese ally, but also to not necessarily reunify the Soviet Union, but to transform, at least 12 of, I guess, the 11 other former Soviet republics, not including the Baltic states, which are NATO members, into what I termed at the time an Imperial Russian Confederation. In 2022, I was forced to reevaluate that flawed assumption because what I saw is Putin invaded. Number one, he invaded with a small force of only 190,000 Russian troops. Woefully insufficient to take over Ukraine. So obviously, I knew from the outset that his intention was not to take over Ukraine, but was a very limited war that had more strategic objectives. Secondly, with the Istanbul Agreement of March 31st, 2022. I was not fully aware at the time, but it's since been disclosed that Putin agreed to a full Russian military withdrawal from all pre-war Ukrainian territory. So, what Hitler-esque or even Putin-esque leader would agree to it. If truly he was bent on imperial expansion of the Russian Federation. No one would agree to that. So that clearly, was forced to reevaluate based on that. And then lastly, in the first week of April of 2022, Putin ordered the withdrawal of all Russian troops in northern Ukraine, 3 different northern Ukrainian oblasts, including Kyiv, which was, really, I think it was a terrible mistake on the part of Russia. Probably, really the only big mistake that Putin's made. He's in many ways, he's pursued the war masterfully. I think not as offensively as I think he should have to try to end the war quickly. But again, as you mentioned, he's a very cool-headed leader, probably the most rational leader in Europe. Certainly much more rational than the irrational leaders that we have here in the U.S. with Biden, neoconservatives, and of course Starmer in Britain and Macron in France. But thankfully, President-elect Trump is also a rational leader, and he is someone like Putin who's dedicated to peaceful solutions, and ending wars. And so I have a great hope for that. But there's still I think 56 days or so of the Biden administration where he could continue to potentially escalate this and try to pressure Putin to do something he doesn't want to do, which is escalate this into a war against NATO. But there's been a lot of escalations lately on the U.S. side that have been very counterproductive to U.S. national security interests.
I want to pick on something you said, and I appreciate you being so honest with even the analysis of yourself of how you thought and perceived Putin. But I want to pick on something particular. Why did you, someone as well-read and well-studied as yourself, why did you think that Putin would want to destroy America? Like, where did that thought pattern come from?
So I grew up as a Cold Warrior. I came of age in high school. I studied, nuclear weapons effects, nuclear arms control, Russian Soviet doctrine. I was, very, very well read for, for a teenager. And I viewed Russia as, I viewed the collapse of the Soviet Union as an intentional, as I stated, which it's very much was. It wasn't as a result of anything Reagan did or the U.S. did. It wasn't SDI. We have this laughably ridiculous idea that Reagan's spending on a research and development program that was never built, the Strategic Defense Initiative. That's what bankrupted the Soviet Union, because it caused them to build too many offensive missiles, and then their economy collapsed. It had nothing to do with that. It was completely a top-down revolution by the Soviet nomenclatura that decided that they didn't want to have to be constantly be on the verge of nuclear war. They wanted to promote world peace, and they wanted to have a convergence strategy with the West, and they thought they could achieve their objectives, be they aggressive, not aggressive, but whatever objectives they had through that means. But I also believe, and I still believe, that part of the reason for doing so was to induce the West to disarm themselves of 90% of our nuclear arsenal. And that's something the U.S. has done, and very much something I opposed very vocally since the late 1980s and warned against. And now, of course, Russia has probably 3 times more strategic nuclear weapons that are operational, about 50 times more non-strategic nuclear weapons. And it's very clear that if we got into a world war with the Russian Federation, U.S. and NATO would lose conclusively. So that's a big part of my rationale for pushing for peace, is because I've condemned Biden's unnecessary and senseless war against Russia and Ukraine as a policy of national suicide. But I misjudged Russian and Soviet leaders as having overly aggressive intentions. I didn't realize the extent to which they were very sincere in their desires for peace with the West, and not just a short-term peace, but a long-term peace.
I think the biggest thing that Westerners and Americans don't understand is it's not even about, it is about the weaponry, but it's not that much about the weaponry. The problem is with, I think, America and the West losing to Russia is I'm talking to all of you Westerners and Americans right now. The population, us as a people, you're not ready to go to war. Russians and Slavs, I'm sorry to say, it's sad to say, it's part of our DNA. We could be sleeping for 10, 20 years, and you come wake us up and you tell us, let's go to war, and we will go to war because this is what we do. So I think that this is the biggest issue that people don't understand. We as Americans, we don't want to go to war, and nor do I think we have a reason to go to war. So when Trump was elected, I don't know about you, the next day I felt like this euphoria, like something great has happened. It was in the air. It was like something positive. It felt like America is coming back the way that I remember America as a little kid. It was a wonderful feeling. And then now we're hearing the escalation building up and building. Even this morning, I'm hearing that the UN Council in Belgium or wherever are making further decisions to escalate. So, David, what the heck is going on? And did we mistrust Trump?
Well, first of all, I've got an 11-year-old son, and he told me, he's like, Dad, this Thanksgiving is going to be the first Thanksgiving that Trump is president, and that's a great thing. I'm like, sorry, son, he's not president yet. So there's an illusion, I think, even an illusion among other countries, that Trump is already leading the U.S. or that he has influence over U.S. policy, and unfortunately, that's completely inaccurate. Unfortunately, there's kind of a transition period in between when a new president is elected and when he's inaugurated. It's over 2.5 months. We're not even halfway there yet. And, so I don't want any of your viewers or listeners to think that what the U.S. is doing right now has anything to do with Trump. In fact, it's being done specifically to spite Trump. It's being done by the Biden administration out of spite against the president-elect. It's being done to try to sabotage his attempts to make peace with Russia. So what I want every Russian to know is that when Trump becomes president, he's going to do a 180 for everything the US, that Biden has been doing to escalate the war. He's going to immediately try to de-escalate. He's going to immediately try to establish a permanent ceasefire, a permanent end to the war in Ukraine, whether that takes days to negotiate or whether it takes months. He wants the war to end the day that he's inaugurated, and he's going to appoint a special envoy to lead those negotiations with the Russian Federation to make sure that they're very serious.
Prove to me that you are alive.
And that they get done quickly. It's possible, again, that it could take a few months to negotiate if he listens to a couple of neocons that he's appointed to advise him in the cabinet. But there are lots of good America First nationalists, led by, I might add, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, that want the war to end yesterday. And so he's going to push that. There's others like Tulsi Gabbard that understand the very real risks of World War III with Russia. Trump himself, most importantly, the president-elect, is absolutely committed to avoiding World War III with both Russia and China. And he wants to negotiate peace deals. He's excited. He wants to get that done as quickly as possible, especially with the Russian Federation, because that is the greatest threat we face right now, is that we could sleepwalk into a war with Russia that neither side wants. I mean, I guess Biden may want it. Some hothead NATO leaders might want it, but every sensible, peace-loving American and European and Russian Ukrainian should not want that. In fact, for the first time since the Istanbul Agreement was almost signed, a majority of Ukrainians, 52% of Ukrainians, support the negotiation of an immediate ceasefire and peace agreement with the Russian Federation. So Zelensky has had the legs cut out from him as he continues to want to fight this perpetual war against Russia that's caused the destruction of Ukraine. It's caused the death or wounding of over 1 million brave Ukrainian service members, both men and women. It's caused a minor contraction of the economy. It looks like they were able to have their economy rebound. So that's a success story on the Ukrainian side. But they're going to have like 50% of their 50 to 80% of their power grid could be down this winter, and that's going to be devastating for Ukrainian civilians. They're going to suffer a lot, and that's not something Russia wanted to do initially. They specifically avoided attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, even though they could have taken it out the first year of the war. But they feel the need to increase the pressure on Zelensky because Zelensky he's an illegitimate president. He's stayed past his term. He's not a Democrat. He's governed as a dictator. Putin's accused of being a dictator, and that might be true. I think that's fairly accurate. But he's at least a leader who supports peace, has wanted to end this war since the day after he invaded, didn't want the war to happen in the first place, invaded very reluctantly, and only made that decision a few days before the invasion. But Zelensky's been killing his political opponents. He's been assassinating them with SBU, CIA-backed death squads. There's been war crimes on both sides, but I would say probably even worse on the Ukrainian side. He's he closed down all the opposition media networks and has forced them to broadcast Ukrainian government propaganda 24/7. So democracy ended in March of 2022 in Ukraine, and all this talk about the need to defend global democracy in Ukraine is a bad joke, and I think most Ukrainians understand that. Ukrainians who live under the Zelensky regime understand that the Ukrainian Rada, they live in fear of potential assassination or imprisonment by the Zelensky regime. And I say this as someone who has always supported Ukrainian independence. I supported Ukrainian independence. I wish that their independence had been maintained from 1918 onward. That's when Ukrainian independence was first achieved with German assistance. And we would have. I think the world would have been better off if the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk had been enforced long term, and mainly the Soviet Union had never existed. We could have perhaps defeated that, and if the Russian Empire had become a republic, perhaps there could have been some kind of federation with Ukraine or Belarus that could have expanded them more their borders beyond that. But so I want what's best with Ukraine for Ukraine, but I believe it's been very clear that NATO, as I've written on my Real War Substack, their crazy pursuit of NATO membership has come at a tremendous cost for Ukraine, as I've mentioned, not the least of which is the loss of 30% of their population. They've actually lost 38% of their population since 2014, since the Maidan coup of February 2014, which was authorized, I might add, by President Biden himself, who was then serving as vice president in charge of Ukraine policy. So, the banner years of peace and prosperity for Ukraine, certainly there was a major economic downturn, but in terms of peace, from 1991 to 2014, they were members of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS, with Russia, which is kind of a loose confederation of former Soviet republics. They also had a treaty of peace and mutual cooperation and partnership that lasted from, I think it was 1997 to around 2019. And those enabled, peace with Russia enabled them to control 100% of their territory, didn't have any refugees, didn't have any attacks on their critical infrastructure, their economy. So that is the only way. Ukrainian leaders need to understand that the only way to peace and security, long-term peace and security, is by negotiating a peace agreement that's minimally acceptable to the Russian Federation. There's nothing that NATO can do to give Ukraine security. There's, as I stated before the war broke out, when I still thought Putin was an aggressor, that there's no amount of weapons that the U.S. could send to help Ukraine win the war against Russia. Russia has 35 times more territory. They have 5 times more people. They have, at least 5 times more in terms of potential military personnel that they could throw at Ukraine. They have perhaps 10 times more artillery and munitions, 12 times more jet fighters, combat fighters, that they can use. They have air supremacy. They have achieved artillery supremacy. They have drone supremacy. They have massive nuclear supremacy, both strategic and non-strategic. Actually, they have, obviously uncontested supremacy because Ukraine doesn't have any nuclear weapons. And so, and they have the greatest cyber offensive capabilities in the world and super EMP weapons that not even the U.S. has. So all of these weapons ensure that Russian victory is inevitable. I believe that Russia won the war essentially in 2022, but Ukraine and the West have refused to admit defeat. And as Putin has learned the hard way, you can win a war, but if the enemy refuses to admit defeat, the war will continue. So, Putin's, made, perhaps several, under a dozen peace proposals since February 26, 2022, since the war began. And unfortunately, we haven't accepted any of them. And if we had accepted the Istanbul Agreement, that would have been a stunning victory for Ukraine. They would have kept 93% of their internationally recognized territory. Now it's going to be around 80%. So, and they suffered tremendous losses because of this stupid and senseless prolongation of the war by the Biden administration.
Before we go on to the escalation letter, because that's what I really wanted to get your expertise on, I just want to put my 5 cents in. I don't think that the biggest problem for Ukraine was the population or the weapons or anything. That was a problem, obviously. You're an expert on it. You know better. But in my humble opinion, the biggest problem for Ukraine has always been the corruption. And we have always been corrupt way before 2022. And it's only gotten worse. Just for people to understand, there's an open safari right now for young men in Ukraine. They are getting snatched off the streets. This is not a TikTok video. I'm talking to my relatives over there. The men, they if they need to get, if their wife sends them out for bread, they kind of jog to the store and jog back. Like they run to the store and back because they're literally afraid of getting snatched off the street. But corruption has always been a problem in Ukraine. It's a lawless state. If someone thinks that it's this blue and yellow, you know, beacon of democracy, you're completely wrong. Yeah, before we move on to the escalation ladder, because that's what I'm really interested in. And my question is, we know that the Biden administration, you know, they're trying to sabotage Trump as much as they can. Our question is, why isn't President Trump being vocal? Why isn't he coming out and saying anything?